And that's where the fire will be built, on top of that, right at the level of that.
Oh, yeah.
So, right now I'm just preheating all that stuff, you know. I don't know. You can go out in the woods and find so many pieces of wood lying around. You cut all this wood, you know, and this stage of the firing is kind of just junk anyway. It doesn't have to be prime, because I'm not trying to raise the temperature in great huge amounts. I'm just trying to get the shelves and the walls and the moisture off the pots, so that when the crunch comes, they'll be able to take the shock. They'll have gone up to a certain temperature. Yeah, this is all just preamble. So basically, it's like the repatriation preamble. It goes on, and you never really understand it.
Yeah,
so there's a lot like that.
And you'll find out.
Well, this is the only way you find out. That you can read and read, and you can, well, participating in whole firings of real wood kilns would help. I've only done one, and it was a long time ago. So I'm sort of at sea, really. You know, I'm just going by what anyone would do if they first, you know, if you had no experience almost in pottery. Because I know this oil thing, but I don't. You put wood on, you get heat really fast. It's amazing how. But it's just a draft. Those are the dampers, and I just started it up by doing what I basically do in my oil can. I light a fire in the bottom of the chimney, and then you can start something out here and it pulls. You know? So I just soaked a rag, some oil, lit it and pushed it down over the edge of the damper, and the chimney's just down. The bottom of the chimney's in there, and it burned for 5 or 10 minutes, which is enough
to get the draft going, moving through the whole thing.
And once there's heat going up the chimney of any kind, this will pull. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's lovely.
Well, it may prove to be more a fun thing to do, and you'll do it once in a while. I don't know.
So what are they going to look like in terms of the glaze? Is it similar?
Well, the ones in the upper half of the kiln, above the floor, basically it's what the two divisions are. There's a continuation of this firebox right through to the back of that that big chamber. And there's a solid floor put across the top with a 4-inch slot running across the entire width at the back. So this fire is going the entire length from here to the back of that. And then it's being turned upwards. And above that floor is conventional stoneware, like pots. I don't know if you have any old ones of mine that have glazes like black and orange. Well, for starters, I put those glazes back on, but I must say I've fiddled around with them a bit for this kiln because I was trying them out in here. So I don't know whether the Shino glaze should be identical, and a luster glaze. I had a luster glaze that I used to use a lot, and I had it still there. It still was in a bucket.
And then the ones in the bottom?
The ones at the bottom are just bare with a glaze. I put a glaze inside like I do on the salt pots, just so they get glazed. And they're just bare pots that were bisqued and then put in there. So the pots, there's pots that are, when you open the door, there's pots right there, 4 feet away from you. So that the fire after 12, 14, 15 hours is going to have, there'll be clinker and ash piled up against these pots. And so the burn will go through that rank of pots, right through everything that's in the bottom half will get the flame. More or less directly, okay? You know, the front sides get more, the back side less. And then the top part is I'm just basically trying to get the heat from the wood fire to melt glazes. I'm not trying to get ash up there. Although I put a few bare pots to see how much fly makes its way up there, because I mean it is a wood fire kiln, and I could put bare pots up there and get a toasted looking, a nice kind of clay color, which is really nice. But I'm basically trying to do two things at once, so I can have, when I unload a kiln, I get a range of stuff, partly for my own satisfaction that it's less boring, but also for the sales. You know, I'm thinking with one eye on. I mean, I mainly make pots for myself, but there is the reality, and people love the stuff I made before, the glazes, conventional glazes. So I did too. I sort of got tired of, which is the cycle. I've done 13, 14 years of salt glazing only. And I start to want something fat on the surface again, something that has a thickness and runs a bit, like moves a little. And you can play with the salt. There was limits. I mean, you put them in, they got salted, and unless you change the body of the pot, the clay body, or there's some glazes that that work in salt, but not that many that I have found. So generally, you're stuck with that clay with a little surface of salt on it, and that after a while that gets limiting.
Is this sort of based on a Japanese design, or
this one?
Yeah.
This is based on. This is like stuffing an anagama, which is a Japanese kiln, into the side of a chambered kiln, which is also Japanese. Essentially, what I have, if you forget that chimney, and if you put the chimney on the other side, you'd have then a one-chambered wood-fired kiln, like you'd see in Japan. And then, traditionally in Japan, they added these chambers. You got 8, 9, 10. You know, they could go for 100 yards. Apparently, in the Middle Ages, they ran for. You know, they'd be unloading the front of the kiln while the top was still being fired, because you progressed up the hill with the fire. But this is basically an anagama, which is a tube kiln. Oriental, Chinese, Korean, brought to Japan. The tube kiln, sort of penetrating a conventional, vaulted kiln, or a big firebox. You could just think of it as a big firebox too. And but having it come back, you see, what I've done is I've utilized the heat instead of letting it go into the kiln, up and down and out the backside. I'm bringing it back, forcing it back this way and out the flue here, and then that way I get the top part of it for something else. It's a hybrid between, technically of what's been built. It's part of an anagama and a fast fire kiln stuck together, because there's an American design that's become known as fast fire. But I haven't ever seen one like this, like in magazines or from people, conversations and stuff.
So you just made it up?
Well, you kind of do over years of looking at patterns of them, and going to site where you've seen.
Well, some of those require teams of people for stoking for a week or something,
weeks
don't
and
they?
weeks. I mean, and it goes by, in Japan, by area, around Bizen. There's these 2-week firings where they just sit. A guy sits here with a fire like this for a week. I mean, he's just putting ash on the pots. That's all he's doing. And these are big kilns. After a week, the kiln's sort of warm, but it's not anywhere near anything. So then they start side soaking it. Then they get the temperature up to mature all that ash, because this ash sits there like fluffy. It's grainy.
So what effect does it have on the pots?
Well, it looks like, if you depending on the wood. I mean, this should look greeny brown. I mean, I used to use an ash. Well, I use an ash glaze that's half ash, half feldspar, and that turns out basically green. Anywhere from, it can be matte or it can be clear, depending on the temperature.
It's mostly fir?
Oh, this is, I've been scavenging this from the lumberyard and building sites, so it's everything. It's mostly, what you get now is all that stuff from the interior, the mixed, I forget what they call it. It's hemlock, and mostly hemlock pine mixed in. Pine's good, but the hemlock's not really, from what I read, isn't a great heat producer, but you use what your neighborhood has. So you're listening to this all the time. See, I mean, I know that sound, this is a nothing fire. This is just a campfire. But you could, I threw 3 or 4 pieces on and it started to go, you could hear it breathe, like in breath. And it's roaring a little. But when you get that main firebox with 3-foot lengths stuffed in there, and all the ash pit really hot with a whole lot of ash in it, and it's, you know, red heat under there and then yellow heat, and where everything's incandescent in that firebox, when you put a piece of wood in, it's ignited before it hits the pile. It's just poof, you know. So
you don't even know what it's going to sound like yet.
Well, exactly. I do. I've been in Japan. I've been around. I'd seen tons of kilns firing, big ones like climbing kilns.
Yeah.
And I know how.
And they make this roar.
Oh, I mean, the traditional way of describing it is it's breathing, and they call them dragon kilns because of the shape of them would go. The tubes would run up the hill like a dragon, and then they would breathe. If you stoked at the bottom end, it would go, and it pulses. And then as that you stoke, and then you let it die until it goes through heavy reduction, smoky, through neutral, and then just as the flame is starting to get transparent, you know, or fluttery, then you open and stoke again. So then by that time it's like an out breath. And then it breathes in and it breathes out. And if you get the stack on the ends of these 5 or 6 chamber kilns in Japan, the end of the kiln is basically, you could put, some of them even just have holes in the end of the kiln. If they're long enough, they don't need a chimney. They are their own chimney. But if it's, usually they had a short chimney, the width of the kiln, shaped like, in a way like that, narrow one way and wide across. So all the exit ports were spaced out across the back wall. They'd go directly into the chimney. And when you fire at the bottom end, there's this roar. It starts, but you can, it's long enough, the kiln is long enough that you can follow the sound up the kiln. Wow.
So it's like a huge horn or
it's
something.
A huge, yeah, and it goes out, and and when it reaches the chimney, it builds this flame, 12-foot flame, say.
Wow.
Just up, and then it sort of subsides, and it goes back to breathing out. I'll just wing it, you know. And I'm not that intelligent about this. I know my nature is that I'll just get a feeling.